Shabbat Shalom. I'm Robert Barr, and this is Eric Barr, my brother, and I know the setting's a little bit different for this Shabbat service. We're going to explain that in a moment. We're going to do something very different tonight, and I'm glad you're joining us for this special Shabbat service. I'm glad my brother's here as well. It's going to be a great opportunity to have a conversation. I'm going to begin with a reading, talk a little bit about OJC, light our candles, and then our conversation. So, put away the pencil and the paper. Put away the notebook and the keys. Set aside the shovel and hammer. Rest. For this interval, no buying, no selling, no laboring, no working, no straining. Not living in the past, not planning for the future. This is a time for celebration, for joy, for mirth. We are here alive to rejoice in another Sabbath, another opportunity to be together, grateful for family and friends. With no distraction, we touch and are touched, the great gift of the Sabbath. So as I said, I'm Robert Barr, and this is Eric Barr, and you're joining us for this Shabbat service at ourjewishcommunity.org. I know many of you have been with us before, and typically our services are streamed from our studio in Congregation Beth Adam, which is located in Loveland, Ohio. Tonight, we're in a very different location. We're up in the mountains of California. It's a little bit chillier here. Fire's on. We're dressed a little bit different for the weather. And our Jewish community allows us, through the use of technology, to do things that typically can't be done in services. We couldn't stream a service in another location if we were in a traditional bricks and mortar congregation. But our jewishcommunity.org uses technology to create a community worldwide. Some of us are watching at 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Others watch this service in archives. And it's not just the technology that makes our Jewish community unique. It is the voice. It's our bold approach to Judaism, a Judaism that recognizes science, appreciates it, and brings it right into the very fabric of what we're doing. It's about creating new liturgy, new words that give expression to who we are and how we understand our place in the universe, our responsibility, the source of ethics and morality. Our jewishcommunity.org is an approach to Judaism that is unique, profound, and bold, and I am delighted that you're sharing this service with us tonight. We're going to continue with our candle lighting, and then we're going to put a context around all of this. You've been very good so far. You've behaved so far. Thank you.
I'm trying.
You're doing good. So we're going to do the candle lighting.
Okay.
On this, thanks. On this Shabbat, we create our moment in time. We pause, reflect upon our yesterdays and tomorrow, to renew our ties with family and friends, to restore our energies, to refresh our spirits. As the sun descends and shadows lengthen, the distraction of the day gives way to the stillness of night. It is time now for us to see not with our eyes, but with our hearts and our minds. As the day gives way to evening, it's time for us to welcome the Sabbath. The candles stand before us waiting to be lit. We recall our ancestors as we too dispel the darkness and banish the cold, to bring glowing softness, warmth, and safety into our homes. May the dancing flames of these candles kindle warmth within our hearts, wisdom in our minds, passion in our souls. Baruch ha'or ba'olam, blessed is the light within the world. Baruch ha'or ba'adam, blessed is the light within each person. Baruch ha'or ba'Shabbat, blessed is the light of the Sabbath. Special match. Fire stick, there we go. I don't know if you can see the candles. We're obviously streaming from a different location tonight, and how we set up is a little bit different. And in order to frame it, I don't know that you can see the candles, but I promise you they are lit. They're behind us. There's also a
They're
fire.
lit.
They're lit. Thank you. And
there are two of them.
there are two of them. Good, thanks. So I appreciate it. So this is my brother, Eric Barr. He is one of my older brothers. I have two older brothers. He's the middle of the three of us. And I'm out here with him in Southern California, where he lives with his wife, several horses, several dogs. So if you hear any noise, horses whinnying or dogs barking, it's because we're filming it, we're videoing in their house. So it may be a little bit, you can hear some random noises, so understand that. So I chose to do this service. I come out here and stay with my brother every year. I've been doing that for about 3 years since he had a life-changing stroke. Some of you, if you've been part of our jewishcommunity.org for some time, may remember that in October of 13, I gave a sermon called To Life. It was based upon the events of the summer, and actually in the spring, when Eric had a stroke. He had had heart surgery a year before, and then a year later developed a critical infection.
Right.
We got a phone call, myself, my brother, that he was in dire straits. He was in the hospital below the mountain where they live, that things were critical. We flew out.
That you should come very quickly.
Right. And we did.
If you wanted to see me.
If we wanted to see you. And we did. We got out here within about 36 hours. And then it was determined that you should be airlifted to Stanford, where while you were there, you had a major stroke. I talked about all this in that sermon on October 13. I'm going to repost it for those of you who didn't see it. But I realized in part that for most people, that was the end of the story. They didn't get to see what was happening. And I felt this seems to be really important. We got to share the next part of the story. What
I'm still here.
You're still good. So, so you had the stroke. Thank you.
Yes.
You had major heart surgery. You were in rehab for.
In Palo Alto, I was in rehab for 9 weeks up in Northern California. And then I was transferred to a residential rehab facility in Southern California, closer to the house, where I lived for about 3 months. And I completed that rehabilitation and I was released. And then I continued outpatient rehabilitation at the hospital down in Palm Desert.
So you've been doing rehabilitation, but for those of you who are meeting Eric for the first time, and even if you heard the sermon that I gave, the change and the effects of the stroke and where Eric is now is incredibly dramatic. So we need to give you a sense of that. So when your first stroke, the smaller of the strokes,
Wiped out my speech.
and
I could not talk at all.
right, and your left arm was
Then I had a larger stroke while I was at Stanford that wiped out my left side, paralyzed my left side.
So when he was taken out of Stanford after almost a month at Stanford Hospital, between waiting about a week before the surgery and then about 3 weeks after the surgery, you were carried out literally in a Hoyer
bag.
because you were.
I could not stand up. I couldn't even sit up without help. I would fall over.
Right. I mean, it was a really devastating. You were struggling with swallowing at that point. Swallowing was an issue.
Swallowing was an issue. Incontinence was an issue.
Memory.
Memory was an issue, and still, depending on the day, is
Right.
still a bit of an issue.
So when Eric was then moved to the acute rehab, he was carried literally in a lift. Ambulance took you.
And at the acute rehab, they taught me to walk a little bit. They taught me to transfer from a bed to a wheelchair, from wheelchair to a toilet.
Mm-hmm. And I recall you walking out on a walker. I mean, it was a lot of work because I had actually flown back out. My wife and we flew back out and helped you and your wife Karen come make the trek from Northern California to Southern California. It really was the first time you had been out of a healthcare facility for about 3 months at that point.
Right, but I did walk out on a walker.
Right. And we went out, and one of the first things you wanted as we were driving, we stopped at Carl's where you went to hamburger. I don't know if you recall that. So we
I
said,
thought we stopped at the fruit stand and got
we stopped at the fruit stand.
apricots or something.
We got apricots at the fruit stand, and then we stopped at Carl's Jr., got you a hamburger, and then drove all the way to Southern California, where you then went to the other rehab and worked really hard and walked out of there
On a cane.
Okay, I mean, you made this dramatic progress, and you've continued to do that. You've continued to do a lot of rehab,
Right.
really gaining strength, beginning to even be able to use your left hand again, which has been sort of the last of the.
Right, that's the last part to come back.
Mm-hmm.
I've even gotten back to riding a horse,
Mm-hmm.
which is tricky.
Yeah, because riding a horse was a lot. I mean, it's a lot of balance. It's a lot of strength. It's a lot of work. Getting up on the horse is a challenge, and these are big-sized horses. These are
Right,
not
getting up and down is a challenge, and then staying on when you're riding, because we go up into the mountains.
right, and keeping your getting your core strength.
Right.
So you were able to do that, and while you were there, while you were at Stanford. Early on, Eric was a director, playwright, movie writer, professor of theater for your entire career. I mean, that's what you've been doing, your whole life, being acting or directing or teaching. And at some point, you said, "I'm going to write a show."
Right.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about that? How did that?
While I was in a rehab, it just hit me for some reason that I wanted to do a show about my experiences. it seemed like the only way to really understand what I'd gone through was to write a show about it, and then to work through the show would give me a kind of distance and closeness to what had happened to me, and it would allow me to see who I was before and who I'd become and who I was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of a way to reconstruct my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I've no clue. I was with a bunch of stroke survivors the other day,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought to myself, man, these people are struggling. If one of them said to me they were going to write a show, I would have said, you're crazy. And I'm sure that's what they said to me.
Right, right. Well, I think we knew you before the stroke, obviously.
Right.
We really, when you're in a hospital and in an acute rehab or any rehab center, they were meeting you as you are at that moment. So
Right.
they didn't know your capacity. In fact, you have a pretty interesting sense of humor, and that caused problems a few times.
Yes, it did. They kept calling the psych people to come and evaluate me. And a neurotherapist was called in because I was a non-compliant patient, and they didn't understand my sense of humor. And the neurotherapist has since become a good friend of mine, and she said she came in hoping to find someone who was really non-compliant and crazy, and instead she found me sort of half-conscious lying in a bed. And she said, of course he's angry. He had a stroke.
What else would he be?
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I think what was interesting, painful, both interesting, painful, and complex was you don't have a lot of memories of the events. A lot of what you wound up bringing into the show
Right.
came from, we kept a diary, a family diary. So myself, my brother, and Karen, your wife, we would sit down, and every night we would write down what would happen. One, in part, just to keep track of it.
Right. I wanted to know exactly what had gone on. I wanted pictures of everything.
Right. And so there's a photo documentary.
Right.
And we started taking notes, and some of the things that you were saying, some of the funny things you were saying, things that were both, and painful things,
Right.
and questions that had to be answered in moments like that. And so you were given those stories. I mean, and in fact, laughter was a big part of what was going on.
Absolutely. We laughed a lot. We laughed a whole lot. We laughed more in the hospital than we should have.
Or is allowable. And in fact, during the sermon, I talked about that. I thought, that was really important, was laughter, because, it was a bad situation. It was really dire. It was really clear that it was touch and go. That I remember when the surgeon came in and said, there were three choices. We can wait, and maybe you'll have another stroke that will leave you a vegetable, or a stroke that will kill you. Or he said, I could try to do surgery without killing you or leaving you a vegetable. Which would you like me to try?
Well, I could have been a V8.
Oh,
But because of the prior strokes, the best we could hope for at that point was a V7. So we eliminated that option.
And you didn't like broccoli.
No, I hate broccoli.
So that was another problem too. So this was the kind of banter that was going on. I think some of the people didn't know quite what to do.
No, they didn't know what to make of us.
Right. And you were also in your professorial role. There was a point where, because of the complexity of your situation, there were meetings after meetings, because there was this tension between waiting to do surgery for fear that there'd be another stroke, but doing it too quickly was a problem because they were worried that the strokes that you had already had would become bleeders and also be devastating. So they were always trying to find when they should do it. So there was a lot of conversations between the surgical group.
And Stanford is a teaching hospital, so there were all these young residents,
Right.
who were just like my students.
Right, and you couldn't help but start teaching. I still remember there was a group of them standing around, and you leaned over to one and you told him that he started dressing better, that if he wanted to be taken, so did you?
Danny Lee.
I don't know. If you're watching Danny Lee, we'll bleep that. But no, and because you said, look at the Dr. Watella, the attending who was always dressed really nice. He said, you should look like him, because if you want people to take you seriously, you should dress the part. And there was another, I think, a med student, maybe a second-year med student, who was absolutely terrified. It was a frightening situation. Here was a guy who was really close to death. His family was standing there, and he was supposed to take your history.
Right, he couldn't even ask me the questions. He was so scared. He was so lacking in self-confidence, he couldn't even ask me the basic questions.
Right, and while everyone was talking around him, you gestured for him to come close, and you talked to him about, said, hey, talk louder, you got to talk again.
Yeah, but I think I was whispering.
You were whispering then, but I don't know if we...
I said, act like a doctor. You need to act like a doctor. at least fake it until you make it.
Right. You said, I need to know that that you know what you're doing. And it was interesting. So laughter was a big part of this. Family was a big part of it. I mean,
Absolutely.
This was,
The fact that you and Benson flew out and supported Karen was amazing. And all of the nurses and therapists can still comment about that to me.
really. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really nice to hear me. But it's for us. We have a strong family. We've remained strong for all of our
Right, and a strong family bond.
Right. The sense that we're all in this. I mean, we're all in it together. Our father had already died at this point. Our mom was older, and I mean, we were on the phone to her. It happened to be Mother's Day, as I recall.
When I had surgery.
And she called, and Benson, our oldest brother, and I. She said, could Eric die? And the answer was, yeah. I mean, that was
Did she ask?
yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Mom asked if it was a possibility. I mean, she knew there was something really wrong. I mean, it's pretty unusual for two guys to get on a plane within 36 hours and rush out with no end date in sight. I mean, we both thought at the beginning, I mean, when we booked our ticket, maybe a week to 10 days, and then all of a sudden we started canceling the ticket. And she was aware that something was so critically wrong, that all of a sudden you were moving, and she wanted to know, is there a possibility? And yeah, it was Mother's Day, and the answer was yeah. And
Happy Mother's Day.
and we were able to call her and said, you survived, because I remember too that the thought that the surgery might be 14 hours, because you had already had prior heart surgery, so just to get in was going to be a major event. They had because you were wired shut from the last surgery, so they had essentially what happened was, because the infection that he had grew on the new valve, they had to open Eric up, and they didn't quite know exactly what they were going to find. They were worried about that. Was part of it. They didn't know, quite frankly, what
We can
parts.
post pictures.
We have post pictures too.
They're on my website. I think.
So what is your website? Because we should put a plug in for your website.
www.apieceofmymind.net. A piece of my mind is one word, .net. That's also the name of my show. And on that website, you can find a link to a documentary that we made with a colleague of mine about the events. And in the documentary, there are pieces of my show. There are also clips from an earlier show I wrote called Bitch and Moan.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are interviews with Bob, with Rabbi,
It's a good one. It's a good.
with Benson, and my wife and my colleagues,
Right. And with you.
and with me.
And there's a picture. And Mariah getting you on a horse.
Right.
A
Neighbor,
friend,
yeah.
neighbor who was getting him on a horse for the first time and
Right.
try to get you to do that. And there's an public radio piece from.
Yeah, on the website there's a link to Public Radio did an audio documentary, and then they actually filmed a little documentary, and that there's a link to that on the website. And there's also a magazine called Stroke Connection, which is the American Heart Association, American Stroke Association's magazine. There's a link to an article that they did about me, which is going to be reissued. The articles will be reissued in May of 2016.
Right. So a piece of my mind is your show. So the first time you did it was at your retirement, really.
I was leaving. I knew that I couldn't go back and teach, and it was like a parting gift to my students and my colleagues. I performed at the university, and when we first decided I was going to do it there, they scheduled me into the Studio Theater, 150-seat theater,
Right.
and they sold that theater out almost immediately. So we were moved into a 496-seat proscenium theater,
Right.
a huge theater, and it was full that night.
It was remarkable. I mean, we all flew out. My wife and my kids and my brother. We all came out, and the reality was, for almost everybody in the theater, other than a few of us, they hadn't seen you. All they had known is that you had been in, that you had this massive stroke, that you had been in rehab, that you were retiring. They simply had no concept of what condition you were. They had no idea.
Right.
And I mean, I still remember when you just came on stage, there were cheers. I mean, people were like standing ovation for showing up.
Right. It doesn't happen all the time. That's kind of cool. Yeah, they thought I was dead.
Right. I mean,
So when I rolled on stage in my wheelchair, they were pretty excited. It was either me or my ghost.
That's right. And you started. You did the show, and you transitioned. In fact, because you eventually it was a 3-part show. You dealt with all kinds of issues.
Right.
You can What kind of issues you deal with? Why don't you give? I mean, I don't want to. It's your show.
Let's see. The first act was about the run-up, the strokes, and understanding the situation that led to the surgery. And Act 2 was about the recovery. And Act 3 was about coming home. How difficult it was, even after all of the therapy and work, to come back home. And how the stroke, I say in the play, that the stroke had such an impact on my brain that I became a stranger in a strange land.
Right.
And then when I got home, I was a stranger in my own house. The furniture was too low for me to sit in. I couldn't sit in this chair when I got home. And my feet got caught in the carpet when I tried to walk. And to go to bed at night, I had to go up 2 flights of stairs,
Right.
16 steps. And by the end of the day, those stairs might as well have been Mount Olympus, Mount Everest.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a challenge, and I couldn't get in the stairs. I couldn't get up the stairs to get in the front door or the back door. So the house that I loved became a trap.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't go out to the barn to see the horses. I couldn't walk that far.
Right.
And the ground is uneven, and so there was great concern that I would fall down.
Mm-hmm. So you explored all these issues. This was what the show dealt with, and then after that first show, you took it to L.A.
After the first show, it became apparent to me that the show actually was more than a gift to my students and colleagues, that it had a life of its own. And we hooked up with the fellow who directed the show, Robin Russin, had a contact at an Equity Waiver theater in Los Angeles. So we took the show to LA and performed it 5 nights in LA for a general audience. And it was really interesting to...
And when you say general, people who didn't know you, they just saw the show, listed
People who just bought tickets because they either subscribed to the theater or saw a blurb about the show and thought, oh, this will be interesting.
And these were people who had no real connection to you, so you had to deal with the show and really reshape it.
Right, we redid the show so that it made sense for an audience who didn't know me. As I've said, in the original performance, I came on stage and I said, I'm alive, because I knew that the audience thought that I was dead. And since it was students and colleagues, they cared that I was alive. Mm-hmm. But when I got to LA, I was performing for strangers. They didn't know me. They didn't care if I was alive or not. Right. So we had to rewrite the opening and restructure the show, tell the story.
And then since those 5
Since then, it became really clear the show had life. And I reconnected with people in Northern California, and we performed the show for the Pacific Stroke Association for their annual fundraiser. Mm-hmm. And we performed for about 300 people there. And then I came back down to Southern California and did it for the American Heart Association chapter in Coachella Valley in Palm Desert. So we did it for the American Heart Association. And now I'm getting ready to go back up to Northern California to perform again for a regional stroke conference in Mountain View, California. And then I will be performing in June at Stanford University Hospital for their Stroke Matters program.
So if you're interested, go to apieceofmymind.net. You post all the dates there.
Right.
We're working in the East, Cincinnati, where Beth Adam is based, to see if we can create an opportunity for Eric to perform there. Also perhaps in Cleveland, where you have some contacts, and then up in Detroit, where we came from, the greater Detroit area. It's a powerful show. It really deals. It's powerful. It's funny. And
it deals with things. Having performed for a lot of stroke survivors and their families, I talk about things that people don't want to talk about. It was interesting at the last performance. I talk about the fact that after the stroke, you're never alone in a bathroom. There were always a group of people, and there was one guy sitting in the front row, and afterward, I talked with his wife. He couldn't speak yet, and she said that's what Andy hates most, that he can't go to the bathroom by himself.
Right? No, I remember that. It was I remember when they were getting to move you out of Palo Alto, the acute rehab, and because I was going to be helping you, they wanted me to learn how to help you shower in case. Right. And so we were in the wet room. I think there were 5 people. There was me, there was you, obviously, you were the principal actor in it, and there was, I can't think of the woman's, I can't think of her name.
Nancy.
Nancy. And she was there, and then two aides were there, and they were explaining stuff. It's like, wow, I mean, the whole dynamic of your life changes because you can't be alone. Everything is
Where before my stroke, I might have liked to take a shower with other people because it was fun. Suddenly, I had to take a shower with other people because it was too much fun, and I might fall down and hurt myself or drown.
It was dangerous. All of a sudden, the place that you loved became a place of danger. Like the house, the place that you loved became more complicated.
Right.
I mean, you're horses. You don't interact with the horses the same way. I mean, you're a little bit more standoffish with the horses. I mean, they're big. You've been kicked before. I mean, you've dealt with horses, I mean, for 30 years of your life, and you know, so a little bit.
I've been stepped on. I've never been kicked.
You were kicked in the you were.
I was kicked in the chest.
Yeah.
It was just a small.
You couldn't breathe.
I couldn't breathe for a day or two. It was not a big deal.
Right. So you have a
I forgot. You're right.
I did remember that because you didn't tell Mom. I remember that finally when you did, she was a little worried about that. So that's why we did this service. I wanted those of you who had seen that sermon to hear that conversation, which also unfortunately included the fact that our mother died as well of a stroke. Actually, a couple weeks after you got out of rehab, I think 2-3 weeks after you finally got out of rehab, your first journey, unfortunately, back to the East was to
attend the funeral.
And you spoke there.
And to be part of the funeral service.
Right. That was very early on. So, you know, that sermon dealt with the notion, and I think it's really important. It's a theme that I've dealt with and I continue to deal with, that we don't know what life's going to hand us. It isn't fair. It's not unfair, it's not fair, life just simply is. And sometimes there are twists and turns that are unanticipated, and we have to face it with the best of human courage and dignity and laughter and friends, which were important as well. People, Facebook, once people started knowing students showed up. I mean, people were very respectful. There was a sense of, no one shared it on Facebook. That was something, and this is an issue people always ask me, how do you handle illness? We kept it a private event, so the information that was going out was always correct, that people didn't have, but people heard about it. We were certainly in contact with
two students showed up who were living in Northern California.
Right, and we were talking on the phone to some of the faculty, so they were always involved. In fact, I was talking to people I literally met at the show for the first time. I had never met them before. So, we don't know what life's going to hand us. And then
I had, of course, that habit of calling people in the middle of the night and waking them up, and then you had to go back and apologize for them.
I did that a few times, and there were a few times you would call me up. You wanted to get a new phone. I don't know if you would call me up in the middle of the night and say, we have to go to the store right now. I don't know if you recall doing that. There were a few.
It was the stroke.
Parts
of my brain were just.
You've used it. You've used that excuse whenever.
Absolutely. Of course, I use the stroke.
Whenever
I can.
So, if you want to get the first part of the story and hear the context about it, about wishing the sermon, listen to the sermon, hear that piece of it. I want to thank Eric for doing this, letting me have this chance to have this conversation. We're actually going to do a second service, which I'm going to post. We're going to talk about religion and illness, because that became a theme that we dealt with. But that's going to be in a separate service. I will post when we're going to do that. So I want to thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you.
So we're going to continue. We're going to do the challah reading and then the wine reading. Now, given that we're up in the mountains of Southern California, we realize that in this part of the country, finding a challah is going to be a challenge. You had suggested that we go get a burrito or a taco. You thought the shell might be the only thing we could find.
That was as close as we could get to a challah.
So for those of you who are always...
Or a churro.
What's it? Is that long thing?
Yeah. Would that be a churro?
A churro?
If it's a challah, it's CH.
Yes.
Better get a churro.
A churro. So we have whatever you want it to be tonight, it's yours. So as the fingers of the challah intertwine, so do we join hands in our common humanity, sharing the fruits of our labor. We cherish that which has been created through human effort. For it's through the work of our hand, the strength of the human spirit, the vision of our minds, that our dreams are woven into the tapestry of time. We celebrate the accomplishments of yesterday and today, anticipating the possibilities of tomorrow. May the sharing of the challah strengthen our bonds with others who walk upon this earth. Baruch Hamal Kapeinu, blessed is the work of our hands. Baruch Hazon Ha'adam, blessed is the vision of our minds. Baruch lechem haaretz, blessed is the bread of the earth. And then if you do have some wine, which I was able to find.
Okay, I'm going to have a
Gatorade.
Gatorade.
You've been drinking, yeah, it's good for you?
I'm dehydrated.
You dehydrate a lot, that's why you always drink it. Wine, Gatorade, juice, whatever you have, water, feel free.
Fruit of the earth.
Fruit of the earth. We celebrate fruit of the vine and the bounty of nature as we lift the cup. For we are part of nature, which gave us birth and continues to sustain us. Even as we depend upon nature, so do we direct its course. Through the search for understanding, we gain the knowledge to shape our world. Guided by the best of human wisdom, the compassion of our spirit, we accept the responsibility which rests upon us. May the taste your wine upon our lips stir within us a reverence for nature and a respect for human endeavor. Bruchim ha'chayim ba'olam, blessed is the life within the world. Bruchim ha'chayim ba'adam, blessed is the life within each person. So we say l'chaim,
L'chaim.
to life.
Prime, perform, recover.
That's a placement. If the folks from Gatorade are watching, a donation would be appreciated. If not,
To our Jewish community.
to our Jewish community. So
There's also an Eric Barr acting scholarship that's almost endowed.
that right. Okay, so the university.
But the Gatorade should go to ourjewishcommunity.org.
The money from Gatorade.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, at the University of the University of California, Riverside
Yeah.
is where you've been a professor. You chair the theater and film
Theater, film, and digital production.
department, and in your honor and appreciate for they set up a scholarship and an endowed scholarship.
Right.
And there's only a little bit more money that needs to be raised to make that permanent.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's wonderful. You can listen to your notes on strokes, which is also there, which are podcasts. That you did.
Podcasts on stroke recovery and stroke strategy.
And notes on acting.
Which is at actingiz.com, my other website, which long before the stroke, I started as a place to stay in touch with my students who had graduated, and I began doing a weekly podcast on acting.
Good.
So we could stay in touch and I could keep teaching.
Great.
And it's great because even from here in the mountains of Southern California, my podcasts like yours reach around the world. I've got students now in Europe and Asia.
That's great. That's wonderful. So yeah, it's really important. This is where technology isn't minor. I think people minimize the possibility that technology has. It really does allow community to stay in place. Professors, teachers to keep interacting with their students. Right. Relationships can be maintained. So ourjewishcommunity.org utilizes it to have the kind of voice that speaks to a modern Judaism. So I'm really glad you're here. Check out all the different things we mentioned. I'll post some of the things when we on Facebook. Go to our Facebook page. Go to our ourjewishcommunity.org. Listen to Eric's podcast. Listen to my podcast.
Listen to his podcast.
No, listen to his podcast. I feel
like his page.
Like
it sounds like it's like the Cabot brothers.
The Cabot brothers, like his
Either
page.
that or the Smothers brothers.
One of the two. Yeah, Mom always liked you best.
It's true.
She is. So we close with the final words. May we know blessings those who are near
And far.
And far. I mean, that's an excellent.
I just assumed it was. It just made sense.
And blessings those who are far. And may the Sabbath bring its goodness to everyone soon, wherever they are. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.